The decision to work on national security was driven by the fact that I knew I could have a big impact. I knew it was a set of important problems. And then actually the unpopularity of it was one of the reasons I knew I had to work on it. I was somebody who didn't have to keep the tech industry happy anymore.
What changes you would like to see on our side to adopt these capabilities faster, to move faster?
So I'd say that the shift is well underway. I'd argue I've actually won that fight. Now it's just a fight as to how fast we can do it,
right.
And is that fast enough? Right. That's the question for the next few years.
Right. Hi, welcome back to Memos to the President. I'm Ylli with the Special Competitive Studies Project. It's an honor to have Palmer Luckey from Anduril today to talk about some of the critical things that they're doing in the defense space. Palmer, welcome.
Of course, thanks for having me.
I wanted to go back to 2017.
Sure.
You had multiple paths ahead of you. You were a successful entrepreneur, great technology leader, great inventor. But in 2017, when this was not popular and cool, you decided to go to a different path. You decided to put your resources, your attention, and your time to help our defense industry.
Well, for people who aren't familiar, the reason that I was looking for something new is because I had been fired from my previous company. So I started a company called Oculus VR when I was a teenager, sold that to Facebook, was there working on virtual reality for a few years, and then was fired in 2017 after I gave $9,000 to a political group you probably shouldn't give money to if you live in San Francisco. And the decision to work on national security was driven by the fact that it was something that I knew I could have a big impact. I knew it was a set of important problems. And then actually the unpopularity of it was one of the reasons I knew I had to work on it. I was somebody who didn't have to keep the tech industry happy anymore. I think that there was a very similar dynamic with Eric Schmidt, where he had kind of exited his day-to-day tech industry roles and wanted to work on national security problems. And I knew that there was a lot of smart people who agreed that we needed better people in this space, but because of the radical political climate of the time, especially, felt like they couldn't without ruining their ability to work on technology in the future. So I felt like it was something that I had to work on, given that I was in a position to do something and didn't have to keep anyone happy. Everyone already hated me.
But what were the challenges in 2017 you identified that you thought, our country needs help in X or Y areas?
It wasn't even any particular area. It's just it's across the board. When I started Anduril, we didn't have one technology picked out as the thing that was the first product that we were going to build. We knew it was going to be built on autonomy, and we knew AI was about to start working, which was controversial topic or opinion at the time anyway. Anduril Industries, the acronym is AI for a reason. Right. But we didn't even talk about our company being an AI company, because back in 2017, AI was still seen as this forever future technology, like fusion.
We were talking about AI winters and all those things.
Exactly. Everyone thought it was something that was always in the future, never in the present. So you couldn't talk about it, even though clearly I believed in it. But there wasn't a particular problem that drew me in so much as the big picture. The big picture is that the United States was at the tail end of a 30-year period of not having its most innovative technology companies work on military problems. Basically, post-Cold War, many companies exited for financial reasons. And then they were repelled by their increasing involvement with U.S. adversaries like China. By the time you get into the 20-teens, you have most of our innovative technology companies like Google, like Facebook, like Apple, hugely dependent on China, looking to China to be their next major financial, not just manufacturing market, but consumer market. And so there's never been a time in U.S. history where we ran this experiment, where our best companies refused to do work on military problems, and especially not when the reason is to placate a geopolitical adversary and the most significant threat to our military in existence. And so that was the big picture that drew me in. I said that we need to change this. We need to build a company where we can get people out of the technology industry and put them to work on national security problems, but working the same way that they're used to in the tech industry, moving very quickly, thinking as a product company rather than a contractor, rewarding efficiency and reuse of components rather than bespoke build of the most expensive thing possible. And that's really the idea behind Anduril.
And look, I think you also identified China as a competitor early on in 2017. It was still not, Main Street. Well, you talk about China as competitor.
You weren't supposed to talk about it. Yeah. I mean, one point that I like to make to people, and this wasn't just a Facebook problem. It was a lot of tech companies. But I said, here you are. You're living in Silicon Valley. And one of the most socially progressive places in the country. You can be anything you want. If you can say you're a man, you're a man. If you say you're a woman, you're a woman. But there's one thing you can't say you are, and that's Taiwanese, because the official position of all these companies is aligned with that of the CCP, which is no. Taiwan is just a rogue province of China that's come under imperial Western control. They're quasi-terrorist, et cetera, et cetera. And so it was this very, very bizarre. Very, very bizarre dynamic. You're right. In 2017, people weren't talking about it. They weren't talking about the enslavement of Uyghur Muslims. They weren't talking about re-education camps.
Surveillance.
They weren't talking about the build of not just a surveillance state in China, but also in many other exporting their surveillance state, basically giving dictators the tools to build durable police state dictatorships. Right. And it was just you couldn't talk about these things if you were in the tech industry because. One, if you're in your company, can't talk about these things because you're afraid it'll hurt your ability to work in China, whether it's Chinese investors, Chinese suppliers, or Chinese consumers. But it even hurts your ability to work with other American companies. Right. If you were speaking out about these issues, then other American companies would refuse to work with you for fear that the CCP would punish them for associating you. So, and by the way, this still goes on today. There's a lot of leaders out there who will not say a single negative word about China or anything they do, even as they have deep and oft verbalized opinions about things that are going on all over the world, including here in the United States, that are happening on a much smaller, much lesser scale.
Right. So you identified China as a tech competitor early on, but when is the moment that you realized they are a national security and defense threat?
It was really through talking to people who are more familiar with that problem. I knew that they were a cultural threat, a kind of an economic threat, a technological. I was familiar with it, and it became clear that our entertainment industry and technology industry were captured by China. That was because of discussions I had. Where they were making very, very clear that you could not refer to Taiwan as Taiwan. You could not say you were Taiwanese. You could not translate your games into the Chinese language to launch in Taiwan, lest it look like you're trying to market actually to Chinese users behind the Great Firewall. These were kind of universal problems across the whole tech industry. And so I started to talk to people in the national security sector and said, hey, how do you see these playing out in your domain? And nobody was necessarily sharing things that they shouldn't have, but even without getting into the classified side, it's very easy for someone in the know to walk someone like me through the problems on the DoD side. So I became aware by people walking me through it. That explained to me that these were not just commercial problems. Right. These were national security problems.
And then I think the next chapter in this journey of yours is not only you identify the national security threat, you also identify that what capabilities we have today are not the capabilities we need going forward.
No. Well, and even a lot of the things we have today are not the things that we need. One of my favorite examples of this is computers. There hasn't been a U.S.-made computer since 2008. That was when the last Dell plant in the U.S. building personal computers shut down. And it's wild that all of the terminals that are used to command and control our weapon systems, write all of our classified emails, all of our most sensitive machinery in our national security apparatus is built on top of Chinese components, mostly built in China. There's so many Lenovo laptops that are built in China under CCP supervision. Imagine if this had happened during the Cold War. Like if you had wrote a book or a movie during the height of the Cold War where the plot is that all American computers or payment terminals are made in in Moscow by the Soviet Union under Kremlin supervision, you'd be like, no, that's impossible. It wouldn't even be believable as fiction. Right. And that's the situation we're in today. So you're right, it's the future items that we need to worry about. But even the today items, I mean, you have an entire military apparatus that is fundamentally built on Chinese components, Chinese supply chain. And if they turned it all off, it'd all grind to a halt the moment that our stuff couldn't be replaced. And by the way, this is another reason that non-repairable computers, phones, everything else are actually a strategic danger to the United States. By putting us on this treadmill where phones are disposable, you make it where China could turn off supply and we wouldn't have any working phones within a few years. Right. That is I don't think that's an accident. I really do believe that the Chinese government has been careful to kind of lead industry trends in a way that makes people more dependent on them continuously, knowing that they can't ever really get off that treadmill without it being very painful.
Right. Enter Anduril. You call Anduril a defense production company.
Defense products company. Defense products company, that's right.
Defense products company. Tell me, how is that different than what we have right now?
So the contrast there is we want to be a product company, not a contractor. So a contractor is paid to perform work. And they're generally, you try to hold them to a certain level of quality, to a certain standard. But at the end of the day, you're paying them to do work. And often you're getting paid even if the thing isn't that great, even if it isn't as useful as you thought, even if it takes way longer than you thought. In fact, if you're a contractor, you can make sometimes more money when something runs longer because you're being paid to do work. A product company, by comparison, spends its own money building products and then sells them to a customer. And if you can't make your product work, nobody's going to buy it. If it's not better than the competition, nobody's going to buy it. And I think that puts a lot of responsibility in the right place. It means that companies that trip and fall skin their own knees rather than spending taxpayer money to do so. Right. It means that it's very painful for them to do that. And so they're going to avoid it to the greatest extent possible rather than honestly seeing it as a way to make even more money. And so it's a thing worth noting that cost plus contracting, the type of contract work that is most prevalent in DoD weapons procurement, it's not actually popular in almost any civilian area. There's basically some types of construction, like residential remodels, tend to be cost plus contracting work. But of course, that has a lot of the same bad incentives and the same bad outcomes. But for the most part, our economy has moved to an economy where companies build products on their own dime and then sell them, and they're responsible for the outcome. I think that that's a good thing. It drives efficient. It allows for freer markets. And so I'm a fan of seeing that thinking in DoD.
Yeah. Let's quickly talk about the products you have out there. You're a big believer in autonomous systems. Can you just walk us through a little bit of some of the key products that you have innovated so far and deployed?
So the brain that powers all of our systems is called Lattice. Yeah. It's basically the AI core that makes all our systems able to think. And we use a lot of the same tech across all these other hardware products we build on top of Lattice. For example, we're building robotic submarines for the US Navy and the Australian Navy. Just did a huge deal with the Australian Navy. They're really leading the way on deploying these systems at scale. And having a robotic submarine that can think for itself makes it vastly more useful than one that can only go out, collect data, then come back home for it to be analyzed. Being able to actually have mission autonomy out in the field and know when to follow something, when to run away, when to attack it, and when to defend yourself. That's really vast. That's really, really useful. It's not just a change of, it's not an improvement. It's a total radical change in how you use that type of asset. So we build robotic submarines. We're building autonomous fighter jets for the United States Air Force. We're building land surveillance systems for U.S. bases all over the world, also for Border Patrol. So we're covering about 35% of the U.S. southern border now with our autonomous surveillance towers. Building a lot of tactical drones, a lot of radar systems, electronic warfare systems, a lot of weapons platforms like autonomous low-cost cruise missiles that can do collaborative swarming maneuvers. We have about 25 different products, so then they're all built on top of Lattice. So it's hard to get into all of them, but there's kind of no problem that you can't apply this type of technology to.
And as you were building these products, the war in Ukraine starts. You've been there. I don't know how many times, but I know you've been there at least once. How have you seen now? You're building these new technologies. The future of war is happening now. What's your key observation?
Well, one key observation is that the moment that Ukraine was attacked by Russia, there was this sudden shift in sentiment among people who don't really pay attention to any of this normally. And all of a sudden, everyone agreed we need better weapons, and everyone agreed that we needed AI in communication systems, and everyone agreed that the system was too slow. But of course, they were only saying these things because it's now popular all of a sudden. And I immediately went on this bit explaining to people that current year is too late to care about current thing. You can't have a political apparatus or a defense apparatus or a defense or technology industry that only starts to work on problems of war and violence at the moment that it becomes politically convenient. You have the most important time to work on it is before the war starts, which inevitably is when all of the angry people with a whole rainbow of different hair colors are going to scream at you in San Francisco. That's the most important time to work on the problem because everything after the war starts is inherently just going to go towards violence that will hopefully end the war rather than deterring the war in the first place. There's a world of moral good that occurs before the war that you can never recapture after it starts. And so that was one of the biggest things that I observed is this huge shift in sentiment, not driven by people really changing their rational analysis. It was an emotionally driven response. And actually, I worry that once you see this conflict wind down, that a lot of those people will say, "Well, I'm glad that is wound down. That was the one loose end
one
in the
episode."
World." There are people who see this. They basically see Ukraine as this last gasp of an old world of violence, and they say, "Oh, if we can just," I'd say even some of the pro-Ukraine sentiment comes from this sense that if we just get through this, I mean, that's it.
That's it.
And that is just not something that anyone has ever been successful believing in history. I mean, people post World War I, you've probably seen all of the so-called expert analysis. Oh, we live at the end of history. It's all settled now. There will never be another war in Europe. There will never be another world war. I mean, and how long did that last? I mean, human nature suggests that as long as there is competition for resources, and by the way, those resources change as society makes other things. People say, "Oh, well, that's fine. We'll just get rid of scarcity." Well, the problem is people will then value the things that remain scarce, the things that we would fight.
If you remember, there was a thesis like, if a country has McDonald's, they're not going to fight each other.
And the reality is, if a country has McDonald's and another country has McDonald's, they won't fight over McDonald's. That's the only thing that changes.
That's true.
And if we figure out, people say, "Oh, well, people fought over food in the past, and now food scarcity it'll be a thing of the past." Okay, well, that means the scarcity will be somewhere else. And until there is universal lack of scarcity in the things that humans value, there will probably be competition that is backed up by violence. It's just it is an unfortunate reality.
And so long you have authoritarian regimes too. I mean, the chances of or the likelihood of war goes even higher.
Well, and some of the especially authoritarian regimes, because for what all criticisms people may have of democracies or even corporatocracies, they are generally not going to engage in the type of irrational behavior that a dictatorship can have driven by one person. If Putin makes a bad decision about who to invade or what to do, well, that's his decision. You need one irrational actor, and this is the other problem. People say, "Oh, it's irrational for China, to start a world war." They don't actually want to, but you have to remember that that presumes kind of a set of Western norms.
That's what I said. The same thing. Yeah, we assume they're rational actors to begin with, and I agree.
And we also assume that people value the same things that we do. The reality is, China does not value life as highly, and there's people who think I'm being some kind of xenophobic.
And we see that with Russia right now.
We see it in Russia throwing away lives, and people say, "Palmer, how can you say that they care about our people just like we do?" I say, no. They clearly do not. The political calculus is different. If in the United States we were losing 7,000 men a week, I mean, it would be the political end of any politician who supported that for even
elections
1 week,
overnight,
much less years. And instead, we've seen his approval go up. It's because, as a culture, they value life not nearly so highly as the United States. Same thing in China. You can look at this in insurance payouts. You can look at how they handle in injury and disability. You can look at how they handle factory safety. They value economic factors over life and certainly over liberty. And so the thing people don't realize is, okay, if you've got someone who doesn't really value life nearly so highly, and they may, I don't think that she values economic productivity as the end. It's a means to an end, which is the reunification of China for the first time in 3,000 years. And that's a mentality people can't grasp. Well, why would he start a war? That would destroy his economy. I say, no. It will reduce a component of his economy for a time, but also he doesn't care. But
for historical reasons, it would put him in history books.
Yeah, he is not worried about a few years of problems. And Yeah, it's just a very, very different value system, and people have not internalized that.
I agree with you. I've seen you talk about killer robot, lethal autonomous weapon systems, and you have a really clear view. And I would argue, you're spot on about this. Can you elaborate your position on this?
Sure. I mean, you know my position.
Yes.
I'm a fan of killer robots. I think that lethality and really anything to do with loss of life is so ethically fraught a area that you have to apply the best technology to it. And like, even without taking a position as to whether it's autonomy or not, the real question is, should you apply the best technology so that you have the highest level of precision, the lowest level of collateral damage. The highest level of discrimination between
combat and non-combat. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so the question isn't should AI be involved or not. It's should you be able to engage in warfare as ethically as possible using every tool at your disposal. Then there's a separate question as to whether or AI is or is not the most effective way. I happen to believe that, but you'll find that many of the people who say they don't want AI in warfare, they don't disagree that it will make it more precise or more discriminatory. They really just don't like weapons at all. They basically use let's not have AI weapons as a proxy for their real argument, which is I think that we should be armed with sticks and stones and water balloons. And you kind of have to get to the core of this. You say, well, look, should a sea mine be able to tell the difference between a fishing boat and a warship? Should a anti-vehicle landmine be able to tell the difference between a school bus and a tank? And by the way, I recently had I had this debate with a journalist. They said, well, Palmer, landmines are illegal. I said, no. And then they said, yes, they've been banned since World War. I had to argue. We then went back and forth for a while. I'm like, you're like you're completely wrong. And they're like, no, because of all of the problems blowing off people's legs. So first of all, no, landmines aren't illegal.
Right.
Lots of people use them.
They're the United States everywhere in Ukraine right now by Russians.
And I pointed out the United States has new landmine programs that we're working on, primarily anti-vehicle landmine programs. And I had to argue. The point is, people are so ill-equipped to have these debates. They don't even think landmines are legal. I say, well, first I had to explain it to them. Okay, look, pretend they are legal because they are. Should it be able to tell the difference between Russian armor and a school bus full of children? And the response was, well, they shouldn't be legal at all. I say, okay, well, you know what? I think they are. I think they're a valuable tool, and I think that the ability to differentiate between combatant and non-combatant is critical. And to say that we shouldn't be allowed to apply autonomy to that, to me, it is a total abdication of responsibility that makes people feel good. They win them with the soundbite. Well, shouldn't you agree that robots should never get to pull the trigger? And I say no, that's a ridiculous thing to presuppose as your endpoint, unless you're willing to engage with this seriously. And anyone who engages with this seriously, I think, cannot come to the conclusion that we should have weapons, yet not have them be as discerning and precise
and
as
we've
possible.
had autonomous systems. I mean, it's not the first time we're entering this phase in warfare.
The other debate is, is this opening Pandora's box? And my point is, well, no, we're just using different types of autonomy to be even more precise. The idea of weapons that act on intent of the operator, but then perform the actual killing action themselves without human intervention or direct supervision, that's a decades-old idea, even with modern weapon systems. But I've actually argued that autonomous weapons go back thousands of years. The first guy to build a pit trap that lets people walk over it and then lets a horse fall through built an autonomous weapon system capable of discriminating between targets and acting on one but not the other to affect a particular battlefield outcome. And you can say, well, but that's not AI, Palmer. Choosing certain thickness of branches for your pit cover is not autonomy. I'd say no, it is exactly the same idea, just implemented using the technology of the time. Exactly. And I'm sure there will be future things that we do that are even beyond autonomy that allow us to measure the world and act on it.
Fascinating, Paul. My last question is, what changes you would like to see on our side to adopt these capabilities faster, to move faster? 2027 is around the corner. We are in the middle, like almost at the end of 25. And we've been debating these issues for, you started Anduril in 2017. So you have you'll almost had your company for 10 years. And we're still debating the same issues.
We are debating the same issues to some degree, but on the other hand, Anduril is doing quite well.
Right.
We're penetrating systems that people said we would never be able to compete with. Our first page of our first pitch deck said to investors said Anduril will save taxpayers hundreds of billions of dollars a year by making tens of billions of dollars a year, and we're doing it like that. We're not quite to tens of billions of dollars a year yet, but we are selling systems that are replacing legacy systems that cost 100 times or more. And so I guess big picture, I'm actually not too cynical. I agree. There's still parts here and there that we haven't been able to get. But like the U.S. Air Force has announced that they're moving to autonomous fighters as their primary procurement. Going forward, there's going to be more autonomous fighters than manned fighters, and that's this generation. That's not like someday. It's the aircraft being funded right now. They plan on having more autonomous aircraft than manned aircraft. So I'd say that the shift is well underway. I'd argue I've actually won that fight. Now it's just a fight as to how fast we can do it, and is that fast enough? That's the question for the next few years.
Right. Palmer, Luckey, thank you so much for coming by. Truly appreciate it. I could go on forever with this conversation because it's a lot of fun. But again, thank you so much for coming by SASP. Truly an honor to have you. And best of luck to Anduril.
Thank you. Hopefully aliens invade so we can fight them instead with the Chinese.
Thank you.